Hello everybody, Abed's brother here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the performance of some old gaming PCs in Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor. This is going to be a bit of a longer video because there are three versions of Shadow of Mordor that we can access on Linux. The first is, of course, the Windows version, which we will be testing through the latest version of Proton. The second version is the Vulkan Linux port. It did get a dedicated Linux port. And then, of course, the OpenGL Linux port. Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor was developed by Monolith, published by Warner Bros. Interactive, released on PC September 30th, 2014. It uses the Lithtech Jupyter EX engine, and uses the DirectX 11 API on Windows and OpenGL 4.3 and Vulkan 1.0 on Linux. You can see the minimum and recommended specifications on the screen there. Very demanding for its day, but these days usually not so much. First up, we're going to be testing the 4690K and the Radeon HD 6950. This is, I built this system specifically just to test OpenGL-only games, and we're lucky that Shadow of Mordor has an OpenGL port. I did try running it through Proton using Proton used wine D3D equals 1, which tells Proton to use OpenGL, and the game kept crashing. It did load, but then it crashed. So if you have TeraScale, at least on my TeraScale setup here, this is pretty much the only way you can play this game is with the OpenGL port. And we are at 1080p low here, and you're probably thinking, hey, that frame rate doesn't look too bad. You're like, okay, we can't hold 60 FPS, but we're doing all right. We're in the 50s. You know, it's like you probably thought, oh, the OpenGL port, I heard it was terrible. Well, I know I said this in my Borderlands 2 video when I looked at the OpenGL port for Borderlands 2. OpenGL is entirely dependent on single core speed. And the i5 4690K, when it's overclocked to 4.5 gigahertz as it is here, was one of, if not the fastest gaming GPU of its era. So right around the time Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor came out, this was the best gaming CPU you could buy. It was they even made comparison tests of it versus like X99, and you couldn't overclock X99 quite this high. Gaming was still at most 2 threads, sometimes 4, maybe. But this was the era when dual cores were pretty much dual cores, and quad cores was definitely absolutely all you needed for gaming. And we're in the 50s most of the time. It's actually pretty decent performance. And here we are in the benchmark. The benchmark does not run long, so I will be running the benchmark with side-by-side comparisons for every system I test here today. And if we reduce the resolution, you can see we do get a little bit of extra frame rate. Still, the benchmark is surprisingly demanding. I mean, nowadays we don't see this benchmark as super demanding. Pretty much, even baseline GPUs like the 6500 XT can run this game very, very well. And for the results, yeah, a little bit higher averages. A little bit higher averages with 720p. I would play it at 1080p. You're still not going to be quite hitting 60 FPS. For test system 2, we're going to be going with the A10770K and the FirePro W5100. So now that we're moving to GCN2 architecture with the W5100, I basically am going to be doing the gameplay test of the version that basically performed the best in the benchmark. So you will see the benchmark after the gameplay. In this case, I believe... What am I running? I think I'm running the Vulkan port. Let me see. Yes, I am running the Vulkan port. So you can see right away, running the Vulkan port, we're same settings as with the HD6950. It's just unfortunate TeraScale has no Vulkan support whatsoever, aside from the experimental TeraCan driver, which, as far as I know, cannot currently run games. But with the Vulkan port I found to be generally preferable to running Proton, just because the Vulkan port can be a little bit lighter on CPU usage. And you can see the A10 is not really stressed. You know, we're running 50, 60%, maybe spiking to 70% usage, but usually we're around 50%. This is not... Middle-earth Shadow Mordor is a very optimized game, especially at this point. So this is really good performance... Oh no, let's just run past. This is very good performance from this system, considering that it's really not a powerful system, but we're staying above 60 FPS most of the time. We'll have to see how we do in the benchmark, which does have some fire explosions happening on it. But most of the time out in the world, you can definitely expect to maintain above 60 FPS most of the time. Let's see how we do in the benchmark. So, the Vulkan port and Proton, no, they actually look like they're pretty close. I think the Vulkan port is going to be a frame or two ahead. It's basically the same. And OpenGL, you can see, at 1080p low is just half the frame rate. And that is, even though the FirePro W5100 is roughly equal in performance to the HD6950, the CPU A107870K is absolutely no match for an overclocked i5 4690K. And you can see the W5100 is bottlenecked a fair bit by the A10, so definitely want to use either Proton or Vulkan, the Vulkan port. Yeah, the Vulkan port, slightly ahead in average, a little bit ahead in minimums. It's basically a wash. For test system 3, we're going to be testing the i5 4590 and GTX 670. Now, the frame rate was actually very good with this one. I was kind of torn between turning the settings up and leaving them the same as before, and I left them the same before. We're at 1080p low here because I thought, well, you know, it'll make it more useful in terms of a direct comparison to what we've already tested. But you can see we are at 100 FPS. There is a 100 FPS cap in-game in Shadow of Mordor. But even at 100 FPS, 95 FPS, you can see the GPU is maxed out. It is at 100%. So, yes, we're near the frame rate cap, but the GPU is fully stressed most of the time. So, for purposes of comparison to previous stuff, I figured I would leave it at 1080p low. And GTX 670 really getting the job done here. And it even says 0.9 gigabytes of VRAM. This is the advantage to using the native port, is that you should see lower VRAM usage. Since, you know, Proton's VRAM overhead, it does add a little bit of VRAM on top of what the game needs. It's not much. They've greatly reduced it from the past. But this is definitely looks like it's going to be a good game for NVIDIA here. I don't know if it's got to be the game optimization. Shadow of Mordor was never a overly CPU heavy game. I mean, if we're running it with an A10 like we did previously, clearly there's some CPU overhead, so that the NVIDIA driver bottleneck does not or should not really matter here. And that seems to be the case. In the benchmark even, you can see the Vulkan port is clearly ahead of Proton in this case, but what's surprising to me is that the OpenGL port is actually hanging pretty close to the Proton performance. It's not quite up there, it is behind, but OpenGL is surprisingly close. Makes me think that the Intel CPU, the NVIDIA driver, must be very optimized for OpenGL. And you can see I did launch the game with the parameter GL threaded optimizations equals 1, so hopefully that did have some effect on improving OpenGL performance, but very impressive performance from the GTX 670. If you're using the Vulkan port, for sure, the Vulkan or even Proton, you could probably turn the settings up a little bit. So now test system 4, we're looking at the AMD FX-8320e and the R9 290. This one should be interesting because, again, FX chips, even though they perform better on Linux, still well behind competing Intel chips of the time, which were the, in price, it was the Core i5s. But here we are at high settings, so I thought, you know, it's time to turn the settings up. The 290 is a very powerful GPU. Let's hope the FX chip can handle it. And so this is 1080p high now. I almost don't think FXAA is working. But we're using a bit more VRAM. Oh, and I used Proton for this. I guess the, I would have thought the Vulkan port would have performed better. That's interesting. We'll have to see what happens in the benchmark. But you can see at 1080p high, the 290 is staying mostly utilized. We're at 100% most of the time. It seems like it dips a little bit when we get a few more objects on screen, but we are right up near the frame rate cap. In fact, you could probably even play this at 1440p if you went low settings or maybe medium settings. You can see the VRAM usage is only at 2.2 gigs, so 290 was very powerful for its time, and it was designed to play games exactly like this. If you can find one of the 8 gig 290s, they probably, like, or as they rebranded it, the R9 390, you'd definitely get some usage out of it these days. And this is still a very good looking game at high settings. So we're right near the frame rate cap here. Let's see how we do in the benchmark. And yeah, the Proton is way ahead of the Vulkan port. I find that extremely odd. And the OpenGL, you know, the FX chip's poor single core performance really comes to the fore here, as it just does not do well at all. And I tested the OpenGL port at the same settings but as the rest of it, but then I thought, well, what if I change it to low settings? Does it improve the frame rate? It does improve the frame rate, but it's still not competitive with Proton or even the Vulkan port. If you're running this combination with an FX chip, just avoid the OpenGL port. It does not work well in this combination, and you can see the story right there. Proton is just out of sight on this particular PC and this setup. Test System 5, we are looking at the i7 4790 and the GTX 1060. Now, based on how the GTX 670 performed, I have high hopes for this system. I'm hoping for some great things from this one. So we are still at 1080p, but we are now at Ultra. So this is 1080p max settings here. Let's see how we do. And GPU is not fully utilized because we are at the game's self-imposed frame rate cap. We are at 100 FPS. And we're dipping a little bit. But NVIDIA, I guess, just really likes this game. That's bizarre. Oh, Caragor. I don't want to fight a Caragor. And I have no choice there. Okay. Go away. Might be Maybe I should have tried riding him, but I can't get... Caragors don't always spawn around this spot, so I can't consistently get one to ride. Though that might be made the video more interesting. VRAM is almost at 4 gigs, so moving to ultra settings does require additional memory, that's for sure. But now that combat's over, we're back up at the frame rate cap, so... Definitely a very... I'm still very surprised at how well NVIDIA performs in this title on Linux. Wait, what? Get up there. We gotta get the panorama. Get the God rays. Get some draw distance. Yeah, it doesn't really seem to phase it. It looks like we dipped to the mid to low 80s during combat, but let's see how we do in the benchmark. Yeah, the Proton is a little... It's ahead. Why did I test the Vulkan port? Maybe the Vulkan port pulls ahead? When we get more objects on screen? Let's see. Okay, we're going to get the fire explosions. Yes, it does. Yeah, Vulkan does pull ahead there. I'd say you could use Proton or Vulkan, whichever one you're more comfortable with. OpenGL, though. Again, on NVIDIA, it's not as good as Proton or the Vulkan port, but definitely turning in good OpenGL performance here. Even with something that's not overclocked. It's just a 4790, so it's Haswell at about 3.7 gigahertz, but that's very impressive from GTX 1060. What happens if we push it to 1440p? Let's try that. So now we are at 1440p. It's 4K screen, but 67% resolution, which is 1440p. And I reduced settings to high from ultra. So we went from 1080p ultra to 1440p high. And let's see what we can do here. And I'm in Proton this time. I guess Proton performs better at the higher resolution. Okay, looks like we're staying over 60. My combat's a little bit rusty here. I guess I branded him. Yeah, we're staying above 60 at 1440p high. This is the biggest surprise of the test so far. GTX 1060 just crushing this game. And it's a decently sized game too, so if this is something, if you're like, I want a game that can absolutely showcase, I can play on my old system and absolutely show how well it performs and get great performance out of it at a fairly high resolution, this is a great one if you have a GTX 1060. It just seems to work really, really well here. I'm kind of surprised. NVIDIA has not had good showings so far in a lot of the Linux testing we've done. It did pretty well in Doom 2016. But most of the time NVIDIA is like, oh, CPU bottleneck. The NVIDIA driver, it's terrible. But you can see here, Proton looks like it is ahead of Vulkan at the higher resolution. That's interesting. Or pulling about even. So, OpenGL still performing well. Again, not as good as Proton or Vulkan, but you lower some settings with OpenGL for if you wanted to run that for whatever reason, you definitely could. Proton and Vulkan looks like they're basically the same. Proton has better minimums, and OpenGL is behind, but easily one of the best showings for any graphics card so far in this test. For test system 6, we are going to be testing the i7-5930K and the Vega 64. So based on how well the GTX 1060 did at 1440p, I'm only going to be testing the Vega at 4K. So we are at 4K and we are at Ultra settings, the Ultra preset. Absolutely no compromises here. And this was one of the ones that did better with the Vulkan port. So right now we are in the mid to low 70s. This is a bigger group than I usually see. And I missed. There we go. Let's see what we got. Mid 60s. Low 60s. Have we dropped under 60 yet? I saw 60. Haven't seen it drop yet. My hotspot on this GPU is still getting high. I saw 99C there for a minute. I'm probably going to have to repaste it at some point. HBM is staying 85 or below, though, so I'm not too worried. Looks like mid to upper 60s at 4K Ultra on the Vega 64. It still almost looks a little shimmery. That could just be the... I still wonder if FXAA is actually working. But Ultra setting is a very good looking game, and Vega is apparently more than up to the task of handling it. Again, 4K. 4K maxed out here. See how our draw distance does. Do we dip under 60? 70s, 70, 69, 72, 64. No, it's pretty good. Let's see how we do in the benchmark. Yeah, the Vulkan port definitely ahead of Proton here. Excuse me. And this is Proton 10.0-4, so this is, at the time of this video, the absolute latest Proton. And OpenGL, OpenGL Ultra is a dead loss. You can get some better frame rates if you go to low. But again, if you're running a Vega, I don't know why you would use the OpenGL port. That's just there, just like, oh, how does that perform? Yeah, well, I was doing all the testing. I figured I'd include it. Probably never going to run the OpenGL port on a Vega 64 again. So I was like, let's see the tail of the numbers, as it were. And the tail of the numbers is the Vulkan port's the best option on Vega 64, followed by Proton. And at low, the OpenGL port is not bad. But now we go into the Ryzen 5 5500 and the Intel Arc A770. And you're probably thinking, well, it's an old game. Older game. No, it is not older. It is an old game at this point. We're at 4K. We're at Ultra, just like with Vega. Can it beat Vega? And the answer to that is yes. Vega was low 70s, mid 60s. The A770 is starting out in the mid to low 80s. Dipping to the upper 60s, low 70s. But most of the time it's spending in the 70s here. It's definitely ahead of Vega and handling the higher resolution much better. So this is another win for Intel Arc. This is 4K 60 without a sweat. You see, when you're playing at 4K resolution, well, when you're playing at any resolution, you want to maintain 60 FPS. You really need to get about 80 to 90 FPS to handle any potential frame drops, and then lock the frame rate to 60 FPS, and then that's how you play with smooth FPS. So ideally, if you want a smooth 60 FPS, you need to get between 80 and 90, and the Intel Arc GPU is really the one for the job here. It's performing a lot better than Vega. Vega's totally acceptable at 4K Ultra. Could definitely do that. And would have no complaints with that. But the Arc A770 is just better. And that's the tale the frame rate numbers tell. Let's see what the benchmark says. And the OpenGL actually does not perform badly on Intel Arc. I thought it would be an absolute disaster, and it's no more a disaster. The OpenGL port is no more of a disaster on Arc than it is on any of the other PCs we've tested. I actually think 4K low, it's performing worse than Vega, a little bit, but Now the Vulkan port or Proton, this is a big win for Intel Arc. This is the hierarchy I was expecting to see when I added the Arc A770 to my test suite. And the numbers tell us Proton and Vulkan port are about the same. OpenGL ports, don't bother with them. They have less performance. So that was quite a video. The GTX 1060 was easily the biggest surprise of the lot, being able to push 1440p 60 FPS. And at the top of the stack, the Intel Arc handling it with great aplomb. Very impressive. That's all I got for you today. If this video was useful to you, please give it a thumbs up. And thanks for watching.